Hi, everyone. Welcome to CEO Confidential. Pierangelo, how are you? Good to see you.
Fine. Hi. Good to see you, Frank. Who is with us today?
Look, Pierangelo, today's dialogue is at the intersection between technology and creativity. Before we meet our special guest, let's run just a few bits of information about her. Caitlin, welcome to CEO Confidential. Question, who are you? What do you do for a living?
Hi, Frank, and hi, Pierangelo. Thanks very much indeed for inviting me today. For the last 20 years, I've worked at the intersection of strategy, technology, and the creative industries. I worked for some time at the BBC. My last role there was running business development globally. I was then CEO of Magnum Photos for a number of years. And now I work as a strategic advisor for businesses in the creative sectors that are entrepreneurially minded and often with IP at their core. I might say I'm also a proud trustee of the David Nott Foundation, which is an incredible organization that gives specialist training to surgeons in countries affected by catastrophe and conflict.
Caitlin, compliments for this, but from your experience at the crossroads between creativity, technology, and business, I would like to have from you some definitions. First of all, what is technology to you?
That's a very good question. I suppose technically it's about applying scientific knowledge to practical aims in human life. That would be the encyclopedic definition. For me personally, though, it's a tool that provides tools and platforms. And when harnessed well, really, it's about a route to improving lives and improving the health of the planet. The other thing I might say is it's all around us, and it's not just in the gadgets that we think of today, our phones and our smartphones, our cars or our computers. It's everywhere. It's in our medicines, in food, in our buildings. And the interesting thing actually about technology, I think, is how it's shifting and where technological innovation is coming from. And whereas the US has been center stage of that for a long time, China is really making enormous progress. And now we see that half the world's patent applications, trademarks, and industrial designs are coming from China, which is quite extraordinary for a nation that wasn't even competitive in manufacturing just 50 years ago. So there's a tremendous force. There are more patent applications every year than there ever have been in the past. And I think the speed and development of technology is so very plain to see. Personally, I really love reading books and studies that deconstruct modern technology into some of its most basic and old-fashioned parts, like in engineering, the nails, the springs, the wheels, and the magnets that keep together and underpin some of the most the sort of newest and most impressive types of technologies. And I'm also fascinated by the intersection of technology and people and their sort of social political systems. And I suppose the discrepancy between what the engineer or the technologist, the designer creates, and then the reality of how and when technologies come to be used and adopted, and their intended and often unintended and unforeseen consequences.
And the other side of the moon, what is art and creativity to you?
I wish I could ask you the same question. And I suspect if you asked everybody that you've spoken to, you'd end up with a very broad range of answers indeed. I suppose for me, it's broad. It's about originality, it's about questioning and flow, I suppose. And sometimes it's also beautiful. I remember very distinctly a quote from Einstein who said that creativity is seeing what others see and thinking what no one else has ever thought, which sort of picks up there on the originality. And aside from the sort of pragmatic applications of creativity or how it lives in different aesthetic forms, for me, it really has a hugely important role in showing us a way of looking at the world, new ways of looking at the world. And
Caitlin, another question on technology. What are the exponential technologies that you work on or you have to deal with, and why will they change the creative industry and our world, as a matter of fact?
Yes, thanks, Frank. I think it's such a fascinating question, and particularly in this moment with we've seen so much progression in technology, change and turmoil around us. And I also feel if anyone was ever in any doubt how technology can intersect with politics, with economics, with culture and civil society, I think we've now seen how all those forces can work together and influence each other. As I see it, technology encompasses almost all of human life, and so does creativity, really. And so the two come together in so many different ways. And I've seen that sometimes they come together very easily, as in the case of sort of broadening distribution, opening new sales opportunities, or managing rights management, and sort of creative workflows more efficiently. Sometimes they come together more uneasily, or with equal measure of joy and skepticism, and I think I've seen that with NFTs and Web3. And occasionally technology actually inspires, in a sense, a sort of response which is an outright refusal to move at the fast pace and the return to slower ways of working and reflecting on the world. As I mentioned, the BBC, and the reason I joined in 2007, it was that the media and creative industries were amongst the first to be disrupted by digital, by new digital formats, distribution methods, and that made it an exciting place to sort of break new ground and invent the future, if you like. So we moved from analog film, tape, and vinyl formats to digital files. Analog transmission of terrestrial television moved to digital multi-channel and streaming services, and we went from theatre release to binge watches on SVOD platforms. And what's quite interesting for me is not just that these technologies had practical benefits, increased in efficiency and routes to new markets, but they actually changed the texture and of the content and material that was created, and over time also ended up changing the creative process itself. If you think about it, directors no longer needed to worry about wasting expensive rolls of film, so they could reshoot scenes in a sort of looser and less storyboarded way. Radio and TV writers weren't constrained anymore by short transmission slots and started writing series with multiple long entwining narrative arcs, leading to the emergence of new genre in high-end drama and scripted podcast series, which I love. Musical performers could retake recordings, and photographers no longer needed to wait for the decisive moment and could take multiple shots. Their film spools were no longer limited, and so they could click away. And those all changed then not just the outputs, but how artists and creative people worked in themselves. So you asked me about the technologies. Some of the big ones that we've seen in the last 15, 20 years include augmented and virtual reality, that were a large part of the conversation about immersive content 10 years ago, perhaps not had the level of mass adoption that we might have seen at the time. Web3, though, burst onto the scene, certainly in the art market in 2021, with authentication and NFTs, which became very fast and furious for a short period of time. And now generative AI is what everyone is looking at very closely, and asks sort of very difficult questions about the nature of authorship, originality, and is also sort of challenging copyright regimes and laws. I come back, I suppose, to the productive tension, I think, between fast digital technology and slower forms of art, craft, and authorship. And I maybe give you one anecdote of myself, which is when we were all pushed into lockdown and everyone and everything went digital for a while. We spent months and months engaging, as we are now, from behind screens. It allowed us to be ruthlessly efficient, but I also noticed that some things can't easily be replaced. Human points of contact and forming trusting relationships, and serendipitous conversations that so unexpectedly become creative. And in my case, as museums and art shows reopened over the lockdown, I really found myself being drawn to, interestingly, to grainy images and textures at first, and then later on to sort of sculpture and physical objects. And I don't think that was by accident.
Caitlin, you mentioned artificial intelligence and questions around artificial intelligence. I need to ask you, what is your take on AI, and especially on its impact on creativity and rights?
Yeah, it's a huge question, and so many people are asking that question at the moment. It's being litigated. It's hard not to see this as having a very profound impact, not just on the creative industries, but actually on how we all work. And some people have said it may be as profound as the Industrial Revolution. I think possibly it could be. What it will mean for jobs, I mean, I think people are in part measure excited and part measure concerned that I think no doubt it will lead to big changes in the way jobs are structured in the coming few decades. From my perspective, I think if we look to the past and if that's anything to go by, innovation has typically increased productivity, and it even drives job creation. So 60% of the jobs that we're all doing today didn't even exist in 1940. And most of the jobs that we do today are only partially exposed to automation. And there was a recent study by Goldman Sachs that came up with those findings. So I think AI will likely complement many more jobs than it replaces. And in the creative industries, as in other sectors, I think that we will need to learn to find ways to harness these technologies and to use them as creative complements, as tools and platforms, rather than sort of shy away from them and be too scared of what they might do. So I think for the creative sectors, people are nervously watching AI very closely at the moment. It's had its breakout iPhone moment with the creation of chatbots and ChatGPT, which really brought home to, I think, us all just the power of what this technology can do. As I say, I think creators are learning to and looking to, some of the curious creators looking to understand how they might incorporate it in their processes and in their practices. And even though generative AI can and large language models can now create derivative works of art and music, text and drawings. So does it put our creative future at risk? I think it certainly, in some areas, I think some creative work will end up being replaced. I think some commercial brand work, decorative imagery, some research, but where the creators and artists are bringing meaning to their work, where journalists are uncovering new facts that can't be found on the internet, and where this is where I come to humans wanting to engage with humans, and artwork is and the creative intention of art is for the meaning in the work, and that's entirely missing when it's created by an algorithm or by a set of technologies. I suppose to speak about this more fully, we should also think about some of the potential harms, and misinformation is clearly a big one of those. We've seen deep fakes and the ability of AI to distort images and replace likenesses of one person or another. I think that has the potential to industrialize misinformation at scale. It's already a problem, and I think it will be an increasing problem. And I think we will need to find new ways to tackle that. And I've mentioned also some of the philosophical questions about creativity and authorship. There's some more practical ones just about copyright and protection of revenue in the creative industries. And here we're seeing lots of legal grey areas. There's litigation. Getty Images, for instance, has just taken proceedings against Stability AI for training its large language models against, for training its AI against Getty Images images open availably on the internet.
Caitlin, talking about AI, you underlined risks and opportunities. Of course, the new technologies have huge ethical questions. Which are, from your point of view, the main questions to be aware of?
Yeah, this is, I think, very important. And we've spoken about some of the risks right now, some of the most present ones, intellectual property issues, and misinformation. I think both of those are very profound and require looking at very carefully. There's also biases and discrimination in these technologies and in AI that's trained against the information that's available on the internet. But when that information only comes from a relatively narrow segment of the world's population, there's inbuilt biases and discrimination that we're aware of. but we need to be more than aware of. We need to find ways of correcting those biases. And finally, present dangers are around personal data and privacy concerns. I think if we had these in the internet before the advent of AI, I think these are only magnified now. And there are very inspiring projects looking at how we can reconceive of the internet and use new Web3 social protocols to give citizens and individuals ownership and control of their data online. And it's quite exciting and inspiring to see the level of commitment and thought that's going into just how we can protect individuals online. But there's certainly a lot to do in that area, both for governments, regulators, private companies, and individuals. In the long term, I suppose AI raises the prospect of a sort of dystopian future of robotics and superhuman AI. I don't feel I'm terribly well placed to comment on that.
Caitlin, philosophical question, yes or no? Is technology neutral?
I'm going to go with no. So I think laws of physics are neutral. There's no inherent biases in chemical processes and material properties. But when it comes to technology, the application of the science in the form of technology, I think this is different. It's designed by people who happen to usually be white men. It's often inside companies with strong profit motives, and technologies to go on to live in a sort of social, economic, political space. So I think for all those reasons, it's not neutral in the way it's applied.
Caitlin, you have already said that you are quite optimistic on the future, but I would like you to briefly elaborate this. How do you see the future?
Yes, thank you, Pierangelo. I am optimistic and I am hopeful, but I also think we really need to keep our eyes wide open. And like any technology, the more powerful it is, the more useful it is, but also the more dangerous it can be if it's misused. I do also take quite seriously, very seriously, the warnings from inside the field of AI itself. You'll have seen the recent open letter from the Future of Life Institute, and Jeff Hinton's recent resignation from Google, so he can speak his mind freely about his concerns. So I think we should take those warnings very seriously. But I am hopeful for a few reasons. And I hope these don't feel too esoteric. But when we deliberately choose hope over fear, I feel that we can conceive of more positive outcomes. And through that, we can actively steer towards those. I also see a next generation of smart, sophisticated, and passionate young people. And if AI technologies are deployed responsibly, I think there's tremendous potential in all sorts of fields to improve the well-being of people and the planet. In this case, I'm also relatively hopeful because I see around us responsible, inclusive, multi-stakeholder dialogue and exchange between people who seem to be listening to each other. I think that's key, and I really hope we can continue to have that dialogue and exchange, building collaboration between different parts of society, industry, governments, universities, and civil society.
Okay, perfect, Caitlin. I would like to underline your warning, keep eyes wide open as persons, just to permit the technology to deliver all the opportunities and cancel and limit the risk. I would like to thank really Caitlin Hughes for being with us today with her huge experience on creativity and technology. And with Frank Pagano, I would like to thank also all those who have been with us today at CEO Confidential, and see you next time. Thank you.